Hello and welcome to Breaking Ground on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon, the show where we chat to industry experts to get a view on what's happening on the ground and new trends emerging within the construction industry. This show is brought to you in partnership with Place Engage, a data-driven platform for more successful public consultation and community engagement for your next development project. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Olan Crowley, Architect and Design Manager with AWL. Olan, thank you so much for joining us. I'm delighted you were able to join us today.
Pleasure.
So, Olan, AWL, Architects Workshop Limited. Tell us a little bit about the work that you're involved in.
We're involved in a wide range of projects, I suppose, across all sectors, both in Ireland and abroad. I suppose the projects abroad range in sort of emergency accommodation and primarily sport, leisure and stadia projects. We're tied in with a company and we're consulting to a company called Innovate Stadia and another company called SBS Terracing, which is a sandwich plate system terracing company. So effectively what it is, it's a modular stadium process and design.
Very good. And in terms of your work abroad, you mentioned there you're involved in the provision of emergency accommodation. You might just tell us a little bit about that, because obviously that's so topical in Ireland. It's a nut that hasn't been fully cracked here. I mean, are there models from outside of Ireland that we need to be looking towards?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of started off, I suppose, back in the day, as long back as by 2006, 2007, we were involved in some stadium projects. We were asked to look at a couple of stadium projects in Poland. Went over to Poland and I'm trying to remember the name, Kazierzyń Kozel and Opole and places like this, all in Silesia. And one thing led to another, and they were sort of all over the idea of the rapid build, demountable, permanent demountable sort of stadium. But what actually came out of that was when they were quite interested in how we were going to do our accommodation, such as your changing rooms, your blocks, your viewing galleries behind the VIP boxes and things like that. And we were talking about them all being done in effectively a volumetric sort of prefabricated system. And we said, like, you've got two ranges. You can go for the bespoke purpose built, or you can go for the refurbished shipping container. And that led into emergency accommodation using shipping containers. And we had loads of designs done and visuals and cost models and all the rest of it. And then that moved into another sphere where we tied up with a company who were actually in Florida called Homefront Homes. They're no longer around, but we're still in touch with the directors. But that was a SIPS structural insulated panel system. And again, a rapid build, modular sort of our modern method of construction, as you'd phrase it now. It was quite interesting. I never saw SIPs moving here in Ireland until recent. And now there's a couple of companies, and one company we're working with, who are based in Galway, who are pushing the SIP system into the market.
You know, it's interesting when we look at maybe the evolution of offsite and other modern methods of construction in Ireland, because, you know, they're getting a lot of airtime at the moment. You know, it's certainly this type of modern construction is certainly stepping forward as a solution. It's really what we need for the moment. But the reality is, everybody we speak to, they've been championing these systems for at least one, if not two, and sometimes more decades. So Can you just maybe talk to me a little bit about the process of adoption of new technologies as you've seen it across the industry, particularly when you have that international perspective?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've got our first sort of I suppose specific project in terms of MMC working with Tempo Housing. Like I said, we first came across Tempo Housing in Holland in 2008. They were doing student accommodation using shipping containers, and went over there with a couple of actually at the time US investors who were looking at doing the same in the United States. And we went around for 2 days, looked at all the projects they had, and just thought, this is a great fit, a great system, clever, reuse, recycling, renewable, sustainable, ticking all the boxes. There was 28,000 shipping containers in Holland that were sitting there rusting away, and they needed a home. We said, we've got the technology to do it. But unfortunately, shipping containers at the time were viewed as a second-hand building product, and it never sort of went too much further. And then it was interesting seeing like things like Sir Grand Designs and them championing shipping containers in terms of residential development. I think the Home of the Year in Northern Ireland and all the rest of it. And everybody said, wow, isn't that so clever? And they're going, bang my head against the wall saying, we were all trying to do this for years, but nobody would listen. But anyway, now, for example, the scheme in Dublin with Tempo, they've moved away from obviously shipping containers, and they've got prefabricated, purpose-built, A-rated, very highly spec'd building system that's all fabricated in Poland and shipped across. You're looking at probably 6 weeks on site, this particular project had planning permission in place already, and the site was purchased. It's a small scheme. It's only 6 units, and that's 12 effectively modules, volumetric modules, in terms of the sort of cabins that are being put together. And cabins is a wrong phrase, because, to be honest with you, in terms of people will think about sort of modular is still the phrase they use, but MMC, and when you put that together, the cladding is a brick slip cladding. You can have any finish in the world you want. For all intents and purposes, you're getting an industrialized tower building process, with exceptional sort of U values and A ratings. And it's like everything else. Something that's made in a factory generally is a lot better than something that's made, in a field.
It just, I suppose, it reminds me of the process of making sausage. You're talking about 6 units for that particular scheme, that actually the on-site time might be only 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But there's probably a lead-in time on that project of how long?
Oh, there's a lead-in time, but it's a bit like the stadium stuff as well. I mean, the lead-in time would be that the factory has to get mobilized as economies of scale. Like if you can gear up with a 50 residential unit order, that the factories can gear up and probably produce about 20 units a week. At the moment they'd be working at about 5 units a week, but it's a case of if they have to work 24 hours a day to produce these units and get them out, the quicker they produce them, the quicker they get paid. It's a bit like I suppose a production factory for cars. I went over, actually, one of the many research trips we went over to a massive facility in northeastern England, and the company at the time was they were known as the Catfoss Group, and Catfoss used to do basically what we're talking about in terms of modern methods of construction, but their modules or their cabins were primarily for the commercial market. They would use them for 5 or 6 years, then take them down, refurbish them, and reuse them again. And they've been doing a huge amount now. I still know the guys there. Jonathan Hilson is one of the main directors, and he's everything from McDonald's to hospital extension, shopping malls. They're rolling them out of the factory. It's quite interesting to see when a country and indeed an industry embraces a new technology, how you can actually transform the speed in terms of how you can deliver projects.
It is interesting. It's a little bit like the adage that things change slowly and then they change all at once, and it feels like there is a bit of a tipping point. I think that maybe if it hadn't been for the crash, Ireland might have achieved this tipping point a good decade and a half ago, because we know the early work was there and we know that it was credible and solid, because actually the success stories from today in the MMC world were those that started actually back then. But it's interesting. What I'm genuinely curious around is the evolving role of the architect in this, because I think for most people they wouldn't see the architects. This might not have been the work that when you set out and you started training, and I know you've recently become a fellow, and so that just is a nod to your experience, a number of years in the industry. But is this the type of work you envisaged when you were studying architecture?
I suppose you know, I'd always had in terms of an interest in terms of stadium architecture, and I did my thesis on a stadium, and I suppose it evolved. You know, you suddenly you graduate, and I went. My late father had an established practice here in Dublin, Crowley Architects Limited, and he said, "You're not coming in and working for me straight away because you'd be the boss's son and it'd be too easy. Get out into the real world." So I went out and knocked on a few doors, and I got a job with a great practice there where I learned a huge amount. Was Douglas Wallace with Hugh Wallace, is now an international TV celebrity, of course. And but no, they threw you in at the deep end. You learned a huge amount. And so there I was doing hotels, I was doing all sorts of things, but modular wasn't something, and indeed rapid build and large quantities of rapid build wasn't something that was on my horizon at the time or on my agenda. But then sort of I suppose the stadium sort of side of things and the rapid build and the modular stadium box concept that we had forced us to look at how we could deliver the accommodation of a stadium as quickly as the actual main stands and the main infrastructure of the stadium. And it was interesting, actually. In one of the projects we had a look at, they wanted a hotel, and the hotel operator that came in was Travelodge, and this is Margate FC down the coast. And Travelodge have for years had been building their hotels using pods, bathroom pods, and indeed prefabricated rooms. Mm-hmm. So that was about 2011 where I first saw literally the hotel rooms being craned in on site, all fully finished, first fix, second fix, wiring, plumbing, all done. And it was like a plug and play concept where literally they just had sort of the stacks were installed traditionally in terms of the service stacks, but basically everything just connected into the rooms. And you were looking at a 50 bed or an 80 bed hotel being delivered about at least 3 times quicker than traditional build.
And that again would fly in the face of what a lot of people would expect the architect's view to be, because even say if we're looking at one-off homes, it would be seen as a selling point if we were talking about an architecturally designed home. Yep. And the shorthand for that is that it will be bespoke and unusual and beautifully appointed. So when you're working within modules as an architect, are you able to deliver on your design vision? Does it limit you? Or
I think the one thing about I suppose modular or MMC is that it's about repetition. And if you're doing the same unit, such as a hotel room, and you're repeating that, it's literally rolling them out of the factory. The thing is being processed, and that's where you drive down your costs, and that's where you pick up the speed. If you're doing, I'll be honest with you, I don't believe MMC is suitable for bespoke one-off projects, because it's unique, and you're maybe from a cost point of view, it's maybe something that's going to be, if you're doing your bespoke design and you're doing something special, you're maybe going to have to consider doing it in a traditional build. But at the same time, there's sort of hybrids then of the MMC model, which isn't sort of a timber frame, and it's not a breeze block. It's or concrete blockwork, I should say. It's things like the SIPS panels, which is a rapid build. It's not it's arriving to site, not flat packed, but vertically packed, prefabricated walls, and they click into place. And you're building maybe not quite as fast as a volumetric prefabricated element coming to site, but not too far off it. So there's different. I suppose every project has its own methodologies in terms of how you're going to deliver it, and usually it's budget driven in a lot of cases, and I think for me, I think there's real opportunities for we're involved in emergency accommodation proposals at the moment, and we're working on designs there where it's replicating designs, but that design can evolve to revert back to standard residential. So the modules are being designed as 37 and 45 square meters, so they will be compliant with apartment guideline sizes, so that when this crisis is over, sooner rather than later, these modular units or these dwellings will revert back to, and they're demountable and movable as well, of course, but they can be reused as housing stock.
And Olan, how has not so much the role of the architect, but say when the architect gets involved? So we know that the RIAI has done great work in promoting design for manufacturing assembly, DFMA. But in terms of when architects are brought into the role for and looking at MMC versus traditional, because one of the things we've learned in recent years is that maybe where planning has been granted on a set of plans, and then when it goes out to tender, actually at that point it can be difficult to try incorporate elements of MMC or to go all in on MMC, you know, and so then usually what you end up is something like the bathroom pods going in, and then that's considered MMC. So actually, how is that changing when you're speaking to project owners on the ground? Are they considering a non-traditional approach earlier in the process?
In a lot of cases, I would have to say no. There was one or two schemes where we were asked to look at apartment schemes that had been granted planning permission, and we took our templates out in terms of the one of the systems. I mean, the widths of the systems, you have to be able to transport them to site on a flatbed truck. And the rules and regulations that we learned in the UK, because we did a number of MMC hospital units in a place called Orpington in Kent back in 2012, and these were all, you know, if the modular unit or pod was over a certain width when it's been transported down, you have to have dispatch riders, and you have front and back, and that adds to the cost. So you learn very, very quickly not to make the units too wide, but so we have a template that we use, and we were saying, right, these units are a certain length, certain width. And of course, it's a case of you're trying to actually do it's like taking pieces of jigsaw and putting them together and trying to make that design work in terms of the modular template that you have. And in a lot of cases, you were falling short. You were looking to try and sort of squeeze spaces and elongate. So to be honest with you, it's not something that I think we were. From the projects we looked at, we were able to successfully sort of say, yes, we can make this work as an MMC, stackable sort of pod structure, as it were. You know, the design was too far advanced as a traditional build.
And I think there's a really interesting lesson or takeaway there for the audience as well about the importance of early engagement, actually, when you're looking at any form of offsite or any of the other modern methods of construction, because again, it is so important. The early engagement from whether it's the technical design, whether it's the structural engineers or the architects coming in, it's something that we hear. It's a message that's conveyed quite a lot. I'm conscious in the broader construction sphere, it has been a really challenging few years. And it feels like we hadn't really had much of a recovery period, essentially, from a challenging decade. So how are your clients and maybe new clients you're talking to about potential new projects for 2024? What's the sentiment that you're getting from existing and new clients? Well,
it's a very, very, very positive, to be honest with you. You I do think, and I have to be careful we're live in there, but I do find the planning process here at times somewhat ridiculous in terms of what we have to do and what we have to furnish to local authorities to try and get a planning permission across the line. And that's down to legislation, but there isn't a consistency, I suppose, in the process. And some local authorities require huge amounts of information. Other local authorities, I've seen planning applications online where they've literally gone in for the bare basics and they've got a grant of permission. And I'm sort of saying, if we were to do this in X, Y, and Z, we'd have to have at least 15 reports, analysis, this, that, and all the rest of it. So the planning process does add a huge amount onto the delivery of residential. And we have a housing crisis, and the housing crisis is only going to get worse. There is the issue with regard to available service land. But like I said, we used to just have our domestic and a few non-national residents looking for accommodation. And now that's gone through the roof, and I think it's going to continue to get worse with everything that's going on in the Middle East in the last few weeks. It seems to be one crisis after another. So I think we as a nation are going to be expected, and rightly so, to take in people that are having a tougher time. God knows, we as the Irish, we travelled the world and immigrated across the world when we were having a tough time, and now we're going to have to welcome people to our shores. But they're going to need accommodation as well,
Well, absolutely, and the people who are building that accommodation are going to need accommodation. So it feels like the demand side of the equation is absolutely not in question at all. I suppose, Olan, yeah, before we finish up, because I am conscious of your time as well. Thank you for being so generous with it. Just because you've referenced planning, is there anything in the Planning and Development Bill that makes you hopeful these things are going to change?
Well, I'd have to say that I think, and it's not often people sort of give credit to politicians, but I think the housing minister, despite the fact that he gets a lot of grief in the media, I think he's produced quite a few plans and quite a few strategies which are very commendable and very forward thinking. And I think I think that's what you need. You need leadership in this sphere, and I think we do have it. I do think we have it there. I think it's refreshing to see sometimes, because we've all experienced various departments and within government and local government level which haven't maybe worked particularly well. But I must say, I think from leadership has to come from the top, and I think it's been quite evident here, in terms of the strategies and the forward thinking.
That's a really positive note to end on, and I am delighted that you've said that, because you're right. It's not always popular to commend and to credit when good work is done. I think maybe the source of frustration maybe is around big announcements and then a lack of tangible delivery after that. But you're absolutely right. There have been some initiatives that genuinely have been transformative on the ground. We just need more of that, and maybe more of an interrogation of the obstacles like planning that are still standing in the way. But thank you so much. And I suppose final word for today. What are your expectations for 2024?
Expectations for 2024, I think obviously we'd like to sort of see an acceleration in terms of delivery of affordable units. Big issue, I think, in this country isn't just affordability and emergency accommodation, but it's actually the first time buyers out there. The young people. I've got kids who are my daughter's in her early 20s and a couple of teenage boys, and I'm sort of thinking to myself, how are they ever going to get a house? And that's something that's the next problem then. Well, it's a current problem now in terms of affordability. And you've got people, we're building a national children's hospital, and we're going to have thousands of staff required, nurses, accommodation. Where are they going to live? How are they going to afford to live in this city and go to work in a children's hospital? So there's a lot of challenges ahead. And I think affordability rapid delivery and affordability. And I think if you deliver something and you have enough supply in the market, that sort of sometimes put manners on the price of something as well. So I think it's sort of somewhat connected. So that's what I'm hoping that the 2024 will deliver. We've got a lot of very capable people in this country who are working hard to get a residential and cheaper residential in the market, from government level all the way down to mere architects like myself. And I think keep the momentum going is what I'd say.
Excellent. Keep momentum going. That's a good note. And you reminded me that only this week a very senior planner really raised the question of, do we have a housing crisis, or is it more accurate to say we have an affordability crisis? And I think he had a really good point. So and that's not a statement, it's a question, and I'll leave that hanging there. But thank you so much. That was Olan Crowley, Architect and Design Manager with AWL. Our thanks to show producer Katie Tallon and to the production team at Hear Me Roar Media. Also thanks to Place Engage for making these conversations possible. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out all of the other real estate and construction shows on iProperty Radio. And finally, thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode of Breaking Ground on iProperty Radio.